The Silk Weavers by Paul Hydes, Q 2439. Narrated by Lex Marinos. The view to the east was stunning, with serried blocks of vegetation stretching down the slope to the wetlands and the forest-clad mountains beyond. Early morning condensation meant that it was easy for Grace, the landlady, to see Andrew was at home, in addition to dozens of other silk weavers residing in gaps below the rail. Andrew was up there with the best of these artisans, she thought, sharing top billing with his friend Goz. They each had their own style. Andrew tended to do his weaving in low-profile locations, always with his primitive signature in the centre of the piece. Goz, on the other hand, was into major public space installations, often on the side of buildings, seeming to like nothing better than to catch the eye of people passing by. She imagined they had disdain for other guild members, whose limited skills resulted in second-rate designs, enough to provide a meal, but with no pretensions of artistry. Of course, there were exceptions, notably the youngsters who could produce phenomenal lengths of silk, using them to travel large distances and attain heights of up to 5,000 metres. They all had a vital role to play in the broader scheme of things, but were under threat from the landlords of adjacent properties. These neighbours hated the weavers, bred in part by fear and lack of appreciation for their role in the ecosystem. Grace knew that in earlier times, some of Andrew's related Australian species had been distinctly antisocial, causing havoc in the suburbs of Sydney, for instance. They had created an atmosphere of fear, killing a few people unwary enough to get in their way when they launched sorties from their hideouts. Ways to control them and rectify the damage caused had been developed so successfully that there had been no fatalities for over 40 years. However, the fear remained, and all members of the guild seemed to be tarred with the same brush, often treated to periodic extermination campaigns. Unfortunately, the campaigns were indiscriminate, not just for weavers, but also other insect life. Grace was afraid that the perpetrators seemed unaware of the positive contributions made by most of these artisans, failing to recognize the benefits of diversity in the ecosystems of the planet. For instance, if insect populations dropped too far, pollination of human food crops would be affected in another monstrous own goal for humanity. Her neighbours seemed to be driven by an urge for everything to be neat and tidy, a state of grace at odds with the natural world, where disorder was the basis for thriving communities. It was as if they thought they owned the joint, when the reality was that they were simply very temporary custodians. Aesthetic considerations aside, Grace knew the weavers helped to control the number of insects, ranging from mosquitoes to cicadas in size. During migrations of termites, many of the homes below the galvanized fence rail trapped the flying fiends before they could damage her house timberwork. Their web silk was often harvested by birds to bind their nests together, the elasticity of the threads proving to be a boon for growing nestlings needing enlargeable accommodation. The weavers themselves were a menu choice for birds and skinks which patrolled Grace's property for an easy feed. The weavers had evolved some interesting behaviours over the millennia, as one young lady noted while admiring a web on a visit to the site one day. "Did you know the female St. Andrew's cross is the one that builds the webs, Grandma?" "No, Grace, I didn't. In fact, I call this one Andrew." "Well, my teacher says the male is tiny in comparison and usually gets eaten when mating is over." "Really? It takes all sorts, I guess. Evolution is wonderfully diverse. One thing's for sure, I'll think differently about them and refer to Andrea from now on." "How did that subject come up at school?" Oh, we do biodiversity modules. The last one was on spiders, flies, and other insects. Did you know that black soldier flies lay eggs in your compost bins and the larvae are detritivores? Sounding the word carefully. I certainly didn't. I guess that means they help break down the compost. Yep, said with all the confidence of youth, and their larvae are edible by humans. Wow! Did they have some for you to try? No, but apparently they tasted like mashed potatoes. We had a project where we had to count how many different species of one type we could find at home. You could choose birds, but there wasn't much point for me because the noisy miners beat up all the smaller birds, so we only see a few bigger ones like pigeons and butcherbirds. Not much diversity on the local bird front. So I chose insects and found lots. That sounds interesting. What did you find? Heaps. There were 8 different spiders for starters, and one of those was an amazing wolf spider carrying about 20 babies in her tummy. Gee, that gives a whole new meaning to childbearing, doesn't it? Sure does. And then there were 5 butterflies, 4 bees, some wasps and hoverflies, and that's just the obvious flying ones. Once I started looking around in the mulch, there were oodles more, so I found about 30 all up. Wow, I bet your teacher was impressed. Yep, Mrs. Airy helped me identify some beetles I'd done drawings of. She's really cool. She said next time your parents feel the urge to clean the place up a bit, they might spare a thought for the spiders and other insects they're putting out on the street. We should celebrate diversity in the ecosystem and admire the artistry of the St Andrew's Cross and Garden Orb spiders. They may be some of the best friends we've got. Well, she's talking to the converted in my case. The thing is, we have to get the message out. I wonder if a publisher would be interested. The end.